The species of bullethead parrotfish are responsible for about 1/3 of all the sand here in the state of Hawaii. So we have one plant that's responsible for 1/3 and one animal that's responsible for 1/3. And the way the bullethead parrotfish produces sand is by grazing on coral. And they eat algae, but in the process they end up scraping down the coral and they end up consuming a tremendous amount of it, and their digestive system can't process it properly, so it comes out the other end as sand in tremendous quantities. We're talking about 700 pounds per fish per year. So if you got 250,000 of those guys in the Ao Channel, you're looking at a tremendous amount of sand. Anyhow, on the port side, if you guys look out, you're going to see the mighty Carthaginian. This vessel was built in 1920. She's 120 foot long, steel hulled, double-masted sailing schooner. She was used as a cargo ship, believe it or not, in Europe. And in the early 1970s, there was a massive shift in the maritime world with the introduction of a big steel box now known as the shipping container. When shipping containers took to the high seas, it was a game changer in the maritime industry. Vessels like this all over the world went out of business. They were decommissioned, repurposed, sold off as scrap metal, taken out into deep water and scuttled. And when you scuttle a vessel, you sink it intentionally, and that's what we ended up doing with this one. And she made her way over to Lahaina in 72. An organization here in Lahaina called the Lahaina Restoration Foundation was looking to create a floating museum. And that's exactly what they did. They bought the vessel and they sailed her back from Denmark. And they sent a crew over, brought her back across the Atlantic, through the Panama Canal, out across the Pacific. Took them 105 days before they finally made landfall. And once they did, they set about converting her into a floating museum. She sat tied up on the wharf in Lahaina for over 30 years. And one of the things that the Lahaina Restoration Foundation neglected to take care of was pretty much everything from the water line down. And so after 30 years of sitting in salt water, she'd been sitting in salt water at that point for almost 80 years. And her hull had essentially turned to Swiss cheese, and there was nothing they could do to make the repairs necessary to keep her afloat. So they had some hard decisions to make. They had three options, really. Option number one was to take her out into really deep water and scuttle her in like 3,000–4,000 feet of water. Option number two was to try and cut her up and sell her up as scrap metal, which is a dirty, messy proposition. And what you're seeing here is option number three. It's probably the most expensive of all the options, but believe it or not, also the most beneficial. This was an empty, flat expanse of sand before we scuttled this boat here, and now we have a vibrant, healthy ecosystem that has turned into a shark nursery, which is super cool. Due to the decline in natural coral reefs around the planet, you're going to be seeing more and more artificial reefs like this. Coral can't just grow up out of the sand. It needs a hard, rocky, steel-like substrate to bind to. And that's what sunken ships provide. So after a very long and drawn-out process, there's a little shark on the move, a little white-tip reef shark heading up towards the... bet she's going to go up over the rail and drop right inside the ship. There he goes. There's another one. Looks like he's going to follow him. Another white tip. Now, we did see some other species around this morning, which was rather unusual. I haven't seen any yet. No We were thinking it was, there were a couple of juvenile tiger sharks cruising about. Anyhow, on December 13th, 2005, after a very long and drawn-out process with the state of Hawaii, going through all sorts of permitting processes and dealing with various agencies, and we had to clean the boat from stem to stern, make sure there was nothing toxic on board, including the hull, making sure there was no barnacles or anything growing on it. And we brought her out here on December 13th, 2005, cut a couple of small holes beneath the waterline, and 27 minutes later she was on the bottom. And she's doing a remarkable job as an artificial reef, as I mentioned to you before. You're going to see more stuff like this. Main reason being is because coral reefs aren't only to provide habitat for fish, they also help to slow storm surge. So as large ocean-going storms make landfall, as they approach the coastline, those reefs help to slow down those masses of water known as storm surge as it makes its way towards land. So the U.S. Navy has stepped up and currently have promised about 25% of the current naval fleet, as it retires from service, will become artificial reef throughout the Gulf Coast, places in Florida, and a couple of spots in California as well. So you see a whole mass of those bluefin trevallies hanging out on the stern or the back of the Carthaginian, and that school keeps getting larger and larger and larger. So it's no surprise that there are other predators that are showing up here. As I mentioned to you before, whenever you have sharks living in a particular area, you have an ecosystem that is in balance. It means that there's enough food for everybody to go around. And there's plenty of fish for other larger fish here to eat.
Точного маневрирования.
Этот корабль.
Его затопили специально, чтобы был риф.